Hopefully we're good.
So I'm here with Dustin Armstrong.
Dustin, or your video tour guide.
Dustin.
Yeah, it's Dustin.
Your video tour guide.
Exactly.
Dustin Armstrong. Hey. Dustin, I'd love to hear your thoughts between this camera and why you picked up a Sony A7S III.
So one of the biggest reasons that I picked up an A7S III is because I actually came from an A7 III. And one of my first kind of big purchases I had as far as cameras go was an A7S. So I was basically adopted into like the Sony system. I already had Sony lenses. And so that's one big reason that I bought it. But some of the other big reasons that I bought it was that some of the things that I wanted on a Sony camera that wasn't available for the longest time, at least in the mirrorless form factor, finally we have a camera that offers the things I were looking for.
You use a lot of different cameras and you have a wide variety of video projects you do. You mentioned you're a wedding videographer, but you also do YouTube. Can you talk a little bit about like the cameras you have used and maybe why that kind of lends itself into wanting an A7S III?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, I'm a wedding videographer. I do a lot of social content as well. I've worked for a few YouTube channels as well, doing filming and editing for them as well. But I also do a lot of corporate stuff, and so I shoot on Reds sometimes. I've shot on Blackmagic. I haven't shot on any Aries, but maybe one day. So just a wide variety of cameras. You know, a lot of people, they're like, are you Canon? Are you Sony? Are you Red? Are you Arri? And for me, I don't really care the brand so much. I get there's an investment because, you know, there's different lenses you use and everything like that. They're just tools, essentially. This tool is easier for convenience with autofocus, and there's a lot of things they've implemented that, you know, I wanted before that they now have. But now I've come to learn, I didn't sell my S1H when I got the A7S III because I've come to learn some things that I didn't really realize I wanted until I had an S1H. And so that's the reason I'm keeping my S1H, is for different reasons for my A7S III, over my A7S III, I mean.
Let's touch on some of those differences because obviously they are very similar cameras, and that's one of the main reasons why I myself picked up an A7S III. What are some of your findings, like first impressions? You got the A7S III out of the box. What were some things that stood out to you?
Well, the A7S III it's much smaller. It's definitely more like more grippy than past Sony cameras, which I do like. I do like having more grip on a camera. So that was kind of like first impression, like ergonomics type of thing. The menu is also something that's been really improved. And I do have to preface, I'm not one that really complained too much about even Sony's older menus. They weren't great, obviously, but it's just learning and getting to know them. But the S1H, you know, has a great menu system. But one of the difference between the two that I came to love on the S1H was the tilt flip screen. So I realized that on the A7S III, you can flip this out and you can tilt it like this, but I really miss being able to tilt it with the camera right here. I definitely prefer the flip out screen, but yeah, so, and then as far as like diving into the menus and the settings, oh, my light just died. What was it, 242?
Yes. Which RGB light do you have?
I've got the Falcon Eyes F7.
Did they send that to you or did you buy it?
I bought it. I like them. They're nice and convenient.
Nice, yeah.
I will say that the menu system on the A7S III, I really have enjoyed so far compared to past cameras. But, you know, this is coming from like a Sony user for years. I did notice that when I got my S1H, the menu was much easier for me to get to know, you know, in just a few hours. Whereas even on the A7S III, I'm still looking through kind of like, okay, where is this at? And so I think it was easier to adopt an S1H menu or a Panasonic menu system over a Sony. So if you're deciding between the cameras, maybe you haven't used either of them, I do think the S1H is still, or Panasonic menus are still better. Whereas the Sony, they've improved, much like a huge improvement, but it still takes some time to get to know it. I'm curious what some of your kind of differences you see first impressions?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously coming from an S1H, it's obviously a very chunky and heavy camera. I personally enjoy that. I do like a little bit of heft on the camera. I think it balances the weight of the lenses a bit more. My concerns with past Sony cameras has always been, color, battery life,
Totally.
functionality, some of those things like overheating also. But
Yep.
Sony fixed a lot of those things and it made it really hard to ignore this camera. So picking out the A7S out of the box for the first time, obviously it's much smaller. The grip still feels good. It doesn't feel like, those cheaper cameras where you have no grip at all. Definitely not as deep as the S1H, but
Totally.
it works. It works for me.
Yep.
Obviously it's a lighter camera, and once you put a lens on that, I do find it's just a little too light for like handheld stuff. You want a little bit more weight to it and a little bit more grip, because otherwise it just feels very light and I feel like I just get more shake out of it.
Yeah, totally. And I wanted to touch real quick now that I'm just thinking about it, was the IBIS. That's a difference between the two. I noticed that, like, I agree. It's a little more shaky doing handheld, whereas the S1H, it's a little more organic, kind of feels more natural. But I am curious. I haven't been able to test it out with the gyro information that you can do in Sony software in post. So I do want to do a comparison with that, just with, as far as IBIS goes on the S1H, and then the gyro information, handheld. Like, how does it look? Does it look kind of organic, or does it look more robotic or something? So I'm curious about that. I do want to say, I think that as looking at the looking at the A7S III, just like as far as the build goes and the ergonomics, it does seem a little less overwhelming. The S1H has a lot more buttons on it.
Yeah.
Whereas the Sony does not. Like, it doesn't have the two buttons next to the lens in the front.
I actually
there's
miss
only
that.
two buttons on the top. Yeah, and I miss it too, but as far as just like an overwhelming type
Right.
of thing, I think the A7S III is a little less overwhelming to somebody who, like, if they
Right.
picked up both cameras, they'd be like, whoa, there's a lot of buttons on this one.
Exactly.
It seems really complicated. And then the A7S III, they wouldn't think that.
Yeah.
And I agree. I do miss it as well, because I feel like I don't have as much. When I was customizing the menu on the A7S III, I just kind of tried to match how I did it on the A7 III. But I was like, I want it to be like my S1H, but I couldn't do that, obviously. So it does have a lot more customize. What's the word? How do you say that?
Customizability.
Customization. That's the word.
Customization.
So it does have a lot more customization, I have noticed, from past Sony cameras. But yeah, the S1H, it is more customizable.
One thing I actually really like about the A7S III, and I don't know if you've ever noticed this, is the fact that like the magnify button, you can just like get rid of it. So you can press it once, get your focus, and then it completely goes away. On the S1H, you always have that box somewhere.
I'm actually really glad you brought that up, because that is something I agree with as well, that I love about the A7S III and just Sony cameras in general, is that you can actually get rid of that box,
Yeah,
that
it's so
magnification box. And you can also, I don't know if you can do it on the S1H. You can punch in while you're recording and check focus.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can do that on the S1H. But yeah, that tick box has just like plagued me since day one of the S1H. And I even put out a thing on my channel. I was like, if you can find how to get rid of this tick box, like, I'll give you what you want. Like, whatever you want, I'll give it to you. If you can figure out how to get. And I've had a few people been like, oh yeah, you just do this, but it doesn't actually do it. They get kind of confused with what I mean.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you can like make it really small and put the tick box in the corner.
I've done that. Yeah.
But then I'm like, But then I'm like, what if I want to punch in though? I'm going to punch in on the corner
20 times on someone's
back.
chin. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so, that is something that I do like about the A7S III, like little things that the S1H does not do.
One big thing, and you actually pointed this out on your channel, is how easy you can adjust that shutter dial. For my line of work, sometimes I'll hand my camera off to someone who shoots and maybe they don't know the camera fully. But I always see, I get the camera back and I'm suddenly at shutter 280 or something, 280 degree shutter. I'm like, what is this? It's so easy to hit that shutter. And I've only noticed like after you pointed out, I'm like, wow, that is so easy to push. A7S III actually does not have that issue. It's a little bit more resistance to actually push that shutter, which I much prefer.
Yep. Yeah, no, I definitely agree, because it was something I didn't really notice at first, but like you said, sometimes, you know, you're holding your camera, you're waiting for the next shot to happen or something like that. And yeah, I would look down and I'm like, wait, how did I get to that shutter speed?
Yeah.
Wait, go back.
Yeah.
And like, I never had that problem on any camera in the past. And yeah, the dial it feels like the dial is just in a better spot too. I noticed that on the S1H, it's right on the corner of the top of the camera.
Yeah.
The shutter wheel. Whereas on the Sony, they've got this exposure dial that I never use.
Yeah. Between these two cameras, they're often very similar. And so a lot of people are wondering whether they should go with an S1H or an A7S III. What's your thoughts on the two cameras?
So I've actually got this question a few times. Actually, a few people just message me on Instagram or in my Discord or whatever.
Yeah.
They're like, I'm really just debating between the A7S III and the Panasonic S1H. And kind of the first thing I start with, obviously, is, do you care about autofocus? Because like you said, I agree with you as well that it's just a tool. And it was one thing that I was kind of sad about when I bought the S1H. I knew the autofocus was not going to be as good as my A7 III, but I was kind of expecting more from it. But it's really it's not that great. So the first question I ask, do you care about autofocus? If they say no, then I'll say, okay, do you care about shooting on any anamorphic lenses in the future? Give you a little background. I don't have a ton of experience shooting on anamorphic lenses, but for what the S1H has to offer over the A7S III, as far as anamorphic lenses go, like, this is the only anamorphic lens I've shot on, is this, and this is one that I put together. It's not really ideal as far as that goes. Those are really, honestly, the two things I ask. Some people say that the skin tones aren't as good on the A7S III compared to the S1H, but from my experience, it looks a lot better in the past. But if you know kind of what you're doing, you can essentially get good skin tones in post. It's more work, but you can get good skin tones with essentially any camera. But I definitely still prefer straight out of camera the S1H over the A7S III. It's minor, but there's just something about, I don't know, maybe it's the optical low pass filter that just kind of makes it feel more, cinematic or something. And cinematic's another subjective word, but I think there's just something about it. It looks more just filmic is the only word I can think of. Whereas the Sony, it definitely looks really good image quality wise, and you can get cinematic footage out of it, but there's just something about Panasonic and the S1H in particular that I just keep going back to. So when it comes to, which camera do I recommend? Do I recommend the S1H or do I recommend the A7S III? And, I love to tell you which camera to buy, but it really is up to you and what kind of, video producer, content creator, or filmmaker you are, because the A7S III, it has so much to offer, and it's got great autofocus. It's got everything you can need as far as filming, content for really anything. But then the S1H is also still packed with a lot of things that the A7S III doesn't have, and maybe you don't necessarily need those. But as far as like, who do I think the A7S III is for? I would say the A7S III is for, YouTubers. It's for wedding videographers. It's for, social content creators, as far as like promos and stuff like that. You can use it for commercial work too, but I think those are the big applications, and solo shooting if you're a solo shooter. Whereas the S1H is more catered towards, filmmakers, indie filmmakers, because it does have the Netflix approval. Maybe the A7S III will get it, but I honestly doubt it will. But it's good for indie filmmakers. It's great for documentary filmmakers, but it's also great for content creation and YouTube. You just have to deal with, it doesn't have great autofocus, but it has a lot of those kind of more professional tools that you kind of need on set. Like, you've got waveform monitor, you've got DCI 4K, You even have 6K for that matter. And you've also got, time code sync and, a whole bunch of things as well. But if I were to say, who are these cameras for? That's what I would say. They're for those type of people.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, I think you can agree that it's really like a lot of these cameras, the image quality is already there when you get a decent camera. So it really comes down to your preferences, how you shoot, what you shoot. That really determines, the overall functionality and what's going to work best for you. Well, Dustin, thank you for joining and talking about the Sony A7S III. And guys, if you have any questions regarding the A7S III versus the S1H, even like comments about like what our findings are, leave a comment down below because we plan on making future content about these cameras. So write them in the comments down below and we'll take a look at that. Thank you, Dustin, and we'll catch you guys later.
Nope. Thank you, Nate, and happy filming.
Happy filming. All right.
I think we got it.